Hey, I'm Kevin. Thank you for joining me. I'm just doing a quick introduction to a conversation that I had with Zander the other day. Zander is an American trans guy who has been around in community spaces since the 80s. He's been quite involved in community activism and now advocacy, so he's participated and spent a lot of time caring about these issues and actually participating in trying to make things better. Xander is highly intelligent and very articulate and seriously thoughtful as well. I really enjoyed chatting to him. I hope you enjoy watching the conversation. Um, Hopefully, I'll get to do it again because I really enjoyed chatting to Xander. But yeah, I'll see you in the next video.
Hey,
Cheers.
buddy.
How's it going?
It's going well. How are you doing?
Oh my God, it's early. What time is it over there?
3:30 in the afternoon.
Oh, cool. I was like, wow, it's later than I expected it to be.
What time is it where you are?
It's just gone 7:30 in the morning,
Oh, wow.
which
Good
is
morning.
not a time I'm normally up. Oh,
Well, thank you for being up.
no, you're all right. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
Absolutely.
So, do you want to do like a little 5-minute kind of like just a really short who you are, what you're doing kind of thing, and then we can
Sure.
take it from there?
Absolutely. Well, my name is Zander Keg. I live in Orlando, Florida, in the United States. I am a licensed clinical social worker. My day job is basically teaching people how to get a good night's sleep and how to regulate their emotions and how to manage their stress and how to deal with conflict, how to deal with distress. That's what I do. I don't work as a psychotherapist or a case manager, which is a typical thing that a social worker would do. I found myself in this nice little niche that I really enjoy myself
cool.
in. Yeah, I love it. I'm originally from California. But I moved to Florida about 3 years ago where my wife's family lives. My wife, Margaret, and I celebrated our 19th anniversary this year. So it'll be our 20th in 2022.
Oh,
So I'm
wow.
really
Congratulations.
happy about that. Thank you. Well, I'm a trans man. Maybe that's not obvious. I'm first generation American, meaning my family is from outside of the country. My family's from Mexico. And I spent most of my life in California, but also Arizona and Colorado and Utah. So I've lived in several different states here in the United States. What else? I've been involved in trans community for about 20 years. I started my medical transition 16 and a half years ago. I was part of lesbian community for many, many years before that. I'm 55 now, so I started my medical transition when I was 39. So I was in lesbian community up to that point, and I had my first girlfriend when I was 14 years old. So I had lesbian friends and I was participating. By the time I was 16, I had a fake ID and I was going to the lesbian bars in West Hollywood. So I've been involved in community in a lot of different levels. For example, I founded a Queer Nations chapter in Sonoma County, California in the 90s. I founded 2 Lesbian Avengers chapters, one in Tucson, Arizona, and one in Denver, Colorado in the 1990s. I served in the military. So I've had this really interesting life.
Yeah, that's a lot of
yeah, I figured just throw it all out there and see what lands.
So let's go back to what is Lesbian Avengers? Was it Queer Nation?
Yeah, Queer Nation. Yeah. So in the 1990s, these were 2 grassroots organizations that were much more radical, like demonstrably so, like doing actions out on the streets. And so, for example, you may be familiar with, because you might have heard it over the years, chants like "We're here, we're queer, get used to it." 2468, how do you know your kids are straight? Out of the bars and into the streets. These are chants from Queer Nation. Queer Nation was founded in San Francisco, California, following some hate crimes that occurred in the Castro district.
Oh, wow.
On Castro Street, which is like the gay like the gayest part of, you know, California, or maybe even the world in some respects. And so there were hate crimes happening in the Castro. And so Queer Nation was formed as an organization of individuals who wanted to fight back, right? And so, you know, more guerrilla tactics in that way. And
so
then
it would have been really left-wing, really like out there kind of socialist stuff as well.
You know, that was never part of the conversation. I do remember the first time I went to a Queer Nation meeting before I started what they called cells, right? Instead of chapters, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of sounds like a terrorist organization.
Yeah, that would have been by design, yeah.
Yeah, but when I showed up to this thing, it was at Dolores Park in San Francisco. I believe it was Dolores Park. Yeah, I think it was. And I'm walking up to this stage kind of environment where people are talking, and I'm noticing everybody standing around, and all I see are flight jackets, rolled up blue jeans, Doc Marten boots, shaved heads. I'm thinking, oh no, I've just walked into a skinhead rally.
Yeah.
And they were Queer Nation. So
yeah. That I was just thinking that could have gone either way.
It could have gone either way. And of course, me, I was this, you know, right out of the military. I was very preppy kind of, you know. Yeah. And so I didn't fit the physical image of a Queer Nation radical, but I did have the activist, you know, energy. Then Lesbian Avengers, that was started, I believe, in New York. And that was, if you've ever heard of something called a Dyke March, the Dyke March was started by Lesbian Avengers. And Lesbian Avengers, their image is like one of those funny cartoon Acme, like Wile E. Coyote bombs. Yeah, with the little flares on the, you know. And so the Lesbian Avengers were similar. It was like grassroots, more, you know, in your face, you know, militaristic kind of guerrilla, you know, tactics. And so, you know, many cities around the United States had a chapter for Lesbian Avengers, and we would do actions. The Dyke March was the most visible one, but we would do other things. I remember leading actions in Denver, Colorado, where we would, you know, do things like surround the office of a member of, you know, the government to make demands of things, that kind of stuff.
And so it wouldn't have been like gay marriage sort of stuff for those guys, would it?
It wasn't at the top of the list. No. Queer Nation was primarily focused on getting more people from the gay and lesbian community to participate in the movement and to stop hate crimes. You know, if you think about it, back in the 90s, we didn't have same-sex marriage. AIDS was still raging through the community. We had outright discrimination was legal. There was don't ask, don't tell was, you know, the policy in the military, which didn't protect people, as people thought, like tens of thousands of people were discharged. So,
So then you're involved in that for a long time, and then
probably around 5 or 6 years in the 90s. Yeah.
And then you went back to school, I think.
I went to college. Yeah, I was in college in Denver. So I started the Lesbian Avengers chapter while I was in my first year of college. I was I was 30 years old when I did that. So I was late to school because I was a high school dropout and special education student. So the idea of going to college was so far removed from my reality.
Yeah, me too. I kind of, because I grew up very, you know, lower working class, it just never it never occurred to anyone that university would be affordable, and it was here at the time. It would, you know, you would have come out with, you know, like $10,000 to $15,000, $20,000 in debt, which isn't, you know, a lot compared to what it is now. And we have a HEC scheme, so you just pay that back over your career. Like, it was very civilized at the time, but it just never, like, I kind of grew up being interested in that, but because I came from a single parent family that was, you know, very lower working class, it just never occurred to me that I could, you know, that was an option. So I went and did other stuff, but
It didn't occur to me either. I grew up with a single parent family. My father was a single parent,
Yeah.
and he was an engineer, but he didn't even have a high school diploma or a
Oh,
college
wow.
degree. My mother didn't graduate high school or go to college. So but it wasn't socioeconomics because my
It just,
parents were both, you know, one was an engineer, one was a business owner. It was more just there was no value for going to college.
mm,
What's the point of going to college? You could be successful without it.
mm.
So there was no incentive to go to college. So that's primarily the reason I didn't go. I went into the military instead. My father served in the military.
Oh,
So, you
cool.
know, that seemed like the likely thing to do. And it did work out really well for me. I did have somewhat of a good time in the
Yeah.
Coast Guard.
Yeah. I have a cousin that was in the army and a friend that's in the army now, a trans guy that's friend that's in the army. And they really liked it. But so I kind of saw the Mars interview that you did, which was really good. And you were talking in that about that actually was it's been quite timely because it means we don't have to cover that stuff. You were talking about, you know, you went to college and you were kind of interested in trans stuff, but you kind of would just like, you really took your time with it. And I'm wondering, did your political sorry, it's very early in the morning here, so my brain's not quite working yet. Like, did your activism sort of start to veer over into that? Because I know that you're involved now in some of the trans W path, like, you know, I know you're on a few boards and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering what the evolution of how you got there was.
When I was in college, I was still involved and active in things, but it shifted from community-based organizing with on the streets kinds of actions to on campus. So when I was a student, I worked in the GLBT Student Services Office, and that's what we called it at the time. It's something else now. I was elected to student government. I was vice president of communication. I was I ran the speakers bureau for our college that had anything to do with anything with sexual orientation oriented. And then one of the things that I was able to do when I was working for the GLBT Student Services Office is get gender identity added to things like our mission statement and things that the college was paying attention to. I formed a student organization called AQUA, which stood for Auraria Queer Alliance. And it was Auraria Campus is the name of the campus where my college was. And so Auraria Queer Alliance, because there was an LGBT student union. You know, that was the name of the groups back then. A lot of them called themselves Gay Student Union or Gay and Lesbian Student Union. So we had a GLBT student union, which is an organization, but they were more like doing activities, going to the movies, book club, bowling. We
So
wanted
like
to do
social
things that were
support.
more, we wanted to do things that were a bit more activist oriented. So what Aqua did is we worked on things like getting same-sex benefits extended to students and faculty and staff, right? Healthcare benefits. And we also lobbied successfully to get same-sex domestic violence materials included into any course that talked about domestic violence, especially within the Department of Human Services, which had a degree that had a lot of coursework on this area. So I kind of shifted into campus-based activism, but not from the same in your face, not antagonistic. So I think what I did is I shifted from activism into advocacy.
Yeah.
While I was a college student. So it was I went in 1996 to college. I graduated in 99. I was in my 30s. It was Denver, Colorado, right? It was like a particular time and place and my age. And so it just sort of happened naturally. And I was becoming more and more aware of trans community, trans history, trans people. I wasn't identifying as trans, but I was starting to get more and more familiar. And so I was making sure that gender identity, it wasn't called that. I was making sure that trans people were part of our panels, and trans people were part of the group of people that we brought to campus for things like like Trans Awareness Week. We had things like that back in the 90s in Colorado, right? We had those same kinds of, actually
Yeah.
October was GLBT Awareness Month on my campus in the 90s. So, you know, we
Yeah.
were very far ahead of things for, you know, beautiful
Yeah,
Denver, Colorado.
like I was in Sydney because I moved to Sydney in 93. No, I moved to Sydney in 94 and came out pretty much straight away as a lesbian and was hanging out. So yeah, that sort of stuff was hanging, like was around in Sydney at the time as well. Like kind of I was involved in a young lesbian support group where we would all meet on, you know, every second Saturday, and that's actually how I formed my social network and, you know, met my first lesbians. And then we would all go off to this women's pool comp every Wednesday night at a pub, and, you know, like kind of slowly started getting involved in, like, that wasn't especially political, but there were a few political people in there, and from there you would go off and do other things. And, you know, yeah, it was an exciting time and it was very interesting. Lots of stuff was happening.
Well, I mean, you know, I don't know why people are so surprised to hear about all of these things. It's like there was a world before social media, right?
We're just very old now, so it's
yeah,
like, what, you
well,
had television in the 90s? Come on now.
but in the mid 80s, I
Yeah.
had a girlfriend. I had a close friend who was also lesbian. Her girlfriend was older, so we would go over to her house, and I was exposed to this whole community. There was a lesbian on my favorite soap opera. There was a gay character on my favorite sitcom called Soap. When HBO, or what they used to call Home Box Office, first came out, that show Brothers had a gay character in it. Like, this is not
No.
new. But people didn't know about it necessarily. I was out in high school. I had a girlfriend in high school. She was a cheerleader at school. I mean, I was a skater kid. She was a cheerleader. It was an odd couple, but we were, you know, out. I was out. She was not out.
Yeah, it's funny, people talking about their historical perspectives of what was happening, like especially some of the younger people now talking about what it was like 30 years ago, and they kind of have the gist, but not quite in some cases. It's quite funny.
You know, I learned recently about a retreat center, so to speak, a haven in the Catskills in New York, upstate New York, in the Catskills, this beautiful mountainous community where there's a lot of summer camps. And in the 1960s, there was a home that was open for people to stay for the day, the night, the week, the month, the summer, all cross-dressers. How did they even find it? How did they find this? How did they find out about this place? How did they get the courage to go? This was back when they could have been jailed. They would have lost their job. Their lives would have been ruined, and they risked everything. So that's what a lot of people don't know, is these opportunities for us to get together and meet each other and do what we needed to do. It was all available, but we risked so much more than people do now, at least in westernized countries, right? We risked so much more. When I went into the military, gay people were not allowed in the military.
No, you would, like, any hint of it, and you would have been out of there. Like, yeah. So how would that work? Because I imagine you would have been kind of a reasonably, you know, butch, masculine presenting woman, because you're 5'9".
Yeah, it doesn't really matter when you're in the, you know, in the military. Women, there are lots of women who are more masculine. It was, you know, I went into the U.S. military before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because I was in the 1980s, and so the recruiter did ask me if I was a homosexual, but I didn't answer him. I just kept quiet. And he kind of looked at me and he said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And I said, "No, sir, I do not." And he said, "Sign here." And I did not at the time have a girlfriend. So I was unwilling to commit a fraudulent enlistment. So if he really, really pushed me on the issue, I never would have been in the military, because I wasn't going to lie. But when he asked me, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I could honestly say no.
I did.
And I went in, and I stayed single the whole time I was in the military, because I did not want to risk losing, you know, that. That
So there would have been, I kind of remember like I kind of remember hearing stories about people feeling a lot of pressure about being gay and being in the military in that time frame, and like kind of living in fear of being found out. I don't like, I imagine that there were like there was a spectrum of that experience. Like some people were like, you know, not that stressed out about it, but cautious, and then other people were quietly freaking out half the time, kind of
Yeah,
thing. But I
I wasn't
certainly
worried about it.
remember.
But I was in the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard is always very different from the rest of the branches of the military, right? The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, they're all very different. And so U.S. Coast Guard is not part of Department of Defense. So it's, you know, it's different. It's a different culture. They're all different cultures, but it's very different culture from the rest. And so but a lot of people, not so fondly, of course, refer to the pre-Don't Ask, Don't Tell period as the witch hunt days, because
Oh,
if they
lovely.
found out you were gay or lesbian, they not only would try and kick you out, they'd want you to report on other people.
Oh,
They'd want you
wow.
to lead them to others. And so I remember when I first got to my duty station in San Diego, one of the first things I was handed was a list of all of the places I couldn't go, right? Off limits places. And the gay bars were on that list, which is always really great because then we all knew where to go. You know,
Yeah.
you did have to be careful because maybe the military police would come in. If something happened, there was like a big bar fight and the city police came and you got all in the middle of that and they knew you were
You're
military,
done.
they could turn you over. So I did have to be careful, but I wasn't really scared. But I have had friends over the years who were in the Army in particular and the Navy, and they did get thrown out. I had a
Yeah.
roommate for a while back in the 90s. He was thrown out of the Navy for being gay.
Yeah, because there used to be stories in Out magazine about this, that I heard about. But so how does it lead? How do you lead from there to what you're doing now?
Oh man. Well, there's a lot of years in between, like 20 something years.
I kind of mean just advocacy, sort of,
Oh, advocacy.
like what you're up to now, like
Um,
in terms of helping people out.
well, I think, doing the campus-based advocacy work, I just continued with that. I never went back to like street level activism from there. Again, also, I'm older. So I went from college to graduate school and then I went to seminary, right? And so by the time I'm getting out of seminary, I don't know, 38 years old. So I'm older and there's enough younger people to be marching up and down the streets. That's not to say I didn't go to events. I went to Pride and I went to Trans March. And when I lived in San Francisco, I helped out with organizing of activities, and I co-founded an organization called the Lou Sullivan Society, which was started to preserve the history of the life of Lou Sullivan, a gay trans man, and also to bring us together as a community. So I facilitated FTM support groups for a couple of years in San Francisco. It was the same group that Lou Sullivan started for FTM San Francisco in 1986. Once he had passed away, then other people took over the groups, and they're not meeting anymore. But for the last few years that they were meeting, I was one of the co-facilitators. So that's a big honor of my life.
What year did
Yeah.
what year did he die, Lou?
Wait a minute. I
It
think
was early 90s.
91,
Yeah.
1991. He died of complications related to AIDS and
Yeah.
HIV. There's actually a panel for him on the AIDS quilt.
Yeah. Yeah, because I remember because I came to this kind of early in some way, because I transitioned in the very early 2000s, but late in terms of what was happening in the late 80s and the early 90s. Like that was kind of this mystical thing that I kind of discovered over, like, because there was, maybe 20 or 30 people. Well, no, there probably would have been maybe 20 guys in Sydney at that time. And that was kind of more straight straight ex-lesbian kind of guys, because the trans guys that are interested in gay men or in men in general tend to have a different pathway. So you would, like, have you discovered that as well? I don't know where they come in, where they
Yeah.
access community support, but yeah, so like there are a lot of, the Southern Comfort documentary was floating around at the time that I came out. Body Alchemy was really, quite pivotal. Just Call Me Cade, or My Name. That documentary about Cade, he was 15 or 16 when he started transitioning.
Yeah, I remember that documentary. Did you
Oh,
ever see You Don't Know Dick? That's like my favorite.
I don't think I did. I kind of was looking for it the other day.
It's very expensive. You have to like buy it. I have it on CD or
Yeah.
DVD, but yeah.
Yeah, see, that's the problem with a lot of that stuff, is that it can be quite difficult to find. Like, apparently Max was talking about Generation documentary, and I haven't really had an exhaustive look as yet, but yeah, they can be quite difficult to find this long
he
after.
did. Max also did Gender Knots, like astronaut, but Gender Knots.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much history in our community. And to this day, if you go on the internet and you do a search for transgender history, you put it in quotation marks and you hit enter, it's going to take you a while to actually find any mention of trans men. And there have been trans men just as the same. There's been trans women, and people, more recently, on the more gender fluid, gender non-binary spectrum. But, pre the advent of testosterone even being available, there were still people who were living as men. And so it wasn't until testosterone was isolated and available and you could take it in the late 1930s, that was even a reality, but people were doing it anyway.
Well,
at the risk of so much.
There are a couple of stories in Sydney of people like passing women, like, people that were just the lovely, quiet, sweet next door neighbor guy who, and I think these date like sometime between, I read it in a queer magazine, so it was called Dirty Magazine, I think. And they did this, the first article was kind of like a trans passing women kind of butch episode, and they talk about there were 2 or 3 cases of like this woman that lived in Lidcombe, which is kind of just outside. It's kind of, there's the city centre, then there's the inner west, and then there's the outer inner west, and Lidcombe is kind of the outer inner west, and it's sometime between the 1930s and the 1950s, I believe. But there are a couple of people that they were just these charming next door neighbour guys, until suddenly it was discovered they're actually women living as men, and they would be sent to psych wards and forced to wear dresses for a number of years until they promised that they would behave and be good, and they learned their lesson, blah 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 blah, and they'd be released, and then they'd be they could get caught 5 or 10 years later again in a follow-up 2 suburbs further along, passing again, living their life as guys, like, just like had everything to lose, nothing to gain, but chose to do it because they needed, for whatever reason, presumably because they needed to.
Absolutely. I mean, in the early 80s, when I was in my young teens, I was sent to a psychiatric hospital for a year. I had attempted suicide, and they put me in there. And, typically you don't stay very long, but this is before the laws changed where they couldn't hold you past a certain number of time, like 48 hours or 72 hours of a hold here in the United States. I'm not sure how it is there. So I was there for 1 whole year. And while I was there, I was subjected to something that was called fashion therapy. So they were trying to get me to wear more feminine clothes, to more feminine shoes, to style my hair in a more feminine way, to learn how to apply makeup. They wanted to teach me how to walk more femininely. And this is how they did it. They sent somebody to meet with me like once a week, get me all dolled up, and then they would have me walk around the psychiatric unit while male patients and staff and medical providers catcalled and whistled me to reinforce the rightness of being female. I mean, if that's not the sickest thing, I mean,
Wow,
obviously it didn't take, but
yeah.
I remember thinking that I was going to do it. I'm very external in my processing, so I never thought that there was something wrong with me. I never felt badly about being a little tomboy. I never had any qualms with liking girls. None of that ever entered in. But what I did know is that if I didn't do what they told me to do, I might never go home. And I also wouldn't be able to watch my favorite TV show that I wanted to watch that night because it was a reward. And I also wouldn't be able to go home to see my father on weekends once a month. And so I basically just did it. And I I just sucked it up and did it so that I could watch Dallas and I could go see my dad,
Yeah.
The things you have to do.
Yeah, I wasn't ever really very if I was given the choice as a kid. I was talking to Maya about this, and she was saying that she, used to actually actively self-correct and kind of catch herself doing stuff as a child, like as a 10 and 11-year-old, and being like, oh shit, I really need to stop this. This is not a good look. I didn't really have any of that. And wearing dresses and things like that was not something that I obviously like to do, but it was just kind of like, just kind of like a bummer. It was like more like a drag for me. And it was kind of,
it wasn't my preference, but I didn't make a big deal out of it.
No, it just was like, oh, well, it's just clothing. Like, like I don't remember ever being, I imagine I don't remember there being any kind of big battles about, there was one football jersey that I fell in love with that my mother, like I liked this piece of clothing so much, and I would have been like 4 or 5. And I kind of think my mother was, because she let me do whatever I wanted to do basically, but that was kind of like the hard no for her, because this jersey disappeared quite quickly, never to be seen again. But like we kind of had this agreement where it was like, you can do whatever you want, and you can have your skateboard and your marbles, and at one stage when I was about 10, I got cowboy guns that I thought were fabulous at the time. So I was allowed to pretty much do whatever I wanted, but we kind of had this implicit agreement that when we went to church on Easter and Christmas, I would behave. And it was like, well, that seems pretty reasonable to me. So I'll play along with that,
Absolutely. I was playing soccer, I was riding my skateboard, I had my Schwinn Cruiser bicycle. And I can look back now in the photo albums, and there are pictures of me in dresses, and it's clearly Easter or, my first communion. I was raised Catholic, so, Mexican Catholic family. So, and I wasn't happy, but it was like a couple of times a year. Maybe even as a young kid, I learned some kind of lesson, or I picked up, I would imagine mostly from my father, because my father was always really good about this, is pick your battles. When I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, my father got me enrolled into this program of human consciousness, or human potential, or actualization, right? It's like, it was very popular in the 70s. And so I was going to these workshops, and it was teaching me, how to assert myself and how to set boundaries. They didn't use those kinds of words, but as a social worker, that's how I recognize them now, right? Like asserting myself, setting boundaries, being myself and not trying to be a chameleon. And so I learned some really valuable lessons that I think have they've been very beneficial for me in my life. They've caused me some problems because I'm not unwilling to take a stand. And I'm also not unwilling to align with, unpopular views that I may wholeheartedly or in part, agree with. and want to, and want to do like solidarity building or maybe even bridge building, I tend to fairly often engage in public dialogue, like in this manner, not that you and I are doing that, but in this manner of being recorded and put online with people that supposedly hate us, right? They hate trans people. They're labeled as transphobic. I know they're not, but they're labeled as transphobic. And then by default, they'll come after me. And so, and I've had some recent experiences of people coming after me and losing quite a lot, actually. So there's a risk, right? There's always risk. It doesn't matter how progressive we are, how advanced our politics are. It doesn't matter our laws in our country. We still always have to contend with people. And unfortunately, in this day and age, some of the worst people I have to contend with are members of our trans community. It's really sad.
It is really sad, and it's kind of interesting as well, because I was kind of off living my life and I had no idea that like any of the stuff that is going down. So I kind of came in and was like, holy shit, what's going on? And I kind of watched, it seemed to me everyone kept talking about Twitter. So I jumped on Twitter and I watched trans rights people for a week or so, and I was like, what is going on? And then there were some kind of GC trans people that were like, because I kind of,
by GC, is that the gender critical? Is that
what you mean they're kind of a bit like, they're not into gender idea, like that whole gender ideology kind of like theoretical stuff.
Wait, hold on. I know about gender critical feminists. Are there now gender critical trans people?
A few.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder how. That's interesting. I wonder how they make what the logic is.
There are people. They tend to be people that transitioned long before, like they kind of transitioned in either before the 90s, in the 90s, or before 2005 is basically
I was 2005, so
so kind of before this whole gender spectrum thing, kind of like, because pardon me, it was in like Judith Halbersham and Judith Butler were known when I transitioned. I actually got given a copy of Female Masculinity that I did never read.
I met Jack.
And it was in the place that I bumped into these theories was in Pat Califia's Sex Change book. Kind of in in the early bit of the book where he's talking about the history of these people were trans, and maybe this is how they like, because he's talking about people that were in the 50s and the 40s, and so they kind of, the information that they gave was quite practical, and then they died, so you can't ask them. He kind of was using queer theory and gender ideology kind of thinking to ask questions to kind of frame maybe how they thought about themselves, as kind of a thought experiment. And I that's where I bumped into it, and it was in a few later chapters as well, but I kind of remember looking at it and going, well, that's really interesting, but not very plausible, and then never thought about it again. And then 20 years later you kind of come back and you're like, it's everywhere, all of these theories, and they are kind of quite interesting. But there like my entire generation, like every trans person pretty much that I know or that I transitioned with, these theories didn't impact them or their transition really at all. Like they were completely oblivious to them.
I mean, I guess what I wonder is, like, am I gender critical? Do people think I'm gender critical? I still don't think I really know what it means if you're trans and trans. So, for example, let me give you some
there's like a conflict.
Some ways that I frame my experience as a trans person. Nobody else. I'm only talking about me. Disclaimer. Okay. I refer to myself as a transsexual, not transgender. And the reason I do that is because my legal sex changed, but my gender has always been masculine. This idea of gender identity is much newer, and I'm not really sure what to do with that because I don't identify as a man. I just live as one.
Yeah.
I consider myself to still be biologically female.
Mm.
I don't have any problem saying that I'm a biological female that lives in the world as a man. That's how I make sense of it. I was a lesbian. I was a dyke basically. I was a masculine, but not uber. I was sort of in the middle, androgynous. We called it back in the day. I was an androgynous lesbian or dyke until I was 36 or 37. That's when I started to change the way I was talking about myself, but still not starting medical transition. And the majority of those years in lesbian community, the people that I spent the most time with were separatists, right? So they were sort of second wave lesbian feminists who would go out of their way to not have to deal with men at all, like at the bank or the grocery store, or you know what I mean? To buy a car, like they would hire the woman to paint their house, or right. We went to the women's bookstore. Everything was women's this, women's that. I was part of that. I never hated men. I was raised by a single father, all the abuse for the most part in my life, all of the real suffering I've ever had to go through has always been at the hand of a woman. It was my mother, my grandmother, and two of my girlfriends who were very physically and emotionally abusive. So, I never developed a hatred for men, but because I was part of lesbian community and part of separatist community, what I didn't get access to was friendships with men, and just friendships with men. And so what ended up happening is, as I was starting my gender transition, I was clear at the time I didn't want to be a man because I had some of that baggage, from socialization and lesbian community about men and violence and those kinds of things. I thought testosterone would make me violent. And so, once I realized once I heard from a doctor that wouldn't happen, I decided to do the medical transition. But the social part of my transition was the most difficult, not the physical. The physical I love all the physical changes, but the social has been really difficult because I didn't really know how to have a friendly conversation with an adult man that wasn't a relative. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to make friends with men. I had never had male friends until maybe middle school, like boys, but not grown men. Because before I went into the hospital, the psychiatric hospital, I spent about 2 to 2.5 years in an all-girls detention school. So my whole adolescence, I was secluded away from men. Except for a couple of male staff who were mostly, a-holes. So it just kind of reinforced, fear about them and not wanting to be, friendly with them. So that's really been, so it's like the two things that have been the most difficult for me socially is in my transition is how to bond with men, and also how to deal with all of the social expectations of me because I'm now seen as a man. I wasn't prepared for how men were treated socially. I never really cared. I guess that's part of the problem. I didn't care how men were treated. I never looked into it. It wasn't until I became a social worker and started working with veterans, almost all men, like 99% of my patients for 4.5, almost 5 years were men. And I'm sort of like, well, how does depression impact men? How does sexual trauma impact men? How does interpersonal violence, domestic violence impact men? I wasn't taught that in my master's of social work program. So I had to learn about men while I was becoming one, so to speak. And it was a challenge. I mean, I feel like I'm over the hump now, 16.5 years later, but that was not easy.
I was very similar in that, like I grew up in a matriarchal kind of family where men were generally seen and not heard. And then went to a girls' school, was kind of, and then came out as a lesbian. Like I went to a few co-ed schools, but never really. I had a few male friends here and there, but they were kind of the exception rather than the rule. And then I came out as a lesbian, And I was never a separatist or anything. I was kind of around a little bit of that, and I had a few friends who were separatists. But and then you kind of, I started to transition, just thinking, oh, like I'll be able to handle it. It's fine. I know I've got some stuff to learn. And then you kind of start to pass, and men are so different to what you expect them to be. And it's just this, like, it's kind of like the curtain gets drawn back, and you go from seeing them as a blob of nobodies to just this rich tapestry of individuals. And you can kind of see that. I kind of didn't ever really think about male emotions apart from anger or or violence. You kind of, those are the big ones, but you don't really, what I mean? Like, you pull back the curtain and you kind of realize that a lot of these guys are kind of suffering in silence and trying to be as stoical as they can while everybody just gets on with their business around them.
Yeah, I mean, the
the
expectations of men are unrealistic. And so that's why, it's like, if you don't know how to manage or how to navigate through that, whether you're trans or cis as a man, there's not a lot of encouragement or opportunities to sort of go, how do I do this? It's at least cis men get to go through a male adolescence, where they do learn some things, but I would imagine that many of them are learning things that I didn't learn. Like, I didn't get smacked around if I cried. I didn't get bullied if I, wasn't good at sports, right? Like, and I was really good at sports, but I didn't get bullied for it, right? So it's really unfortunate how, I could wear jeans and tennis shoes and a t-shirt and be called a tomboy, but my male classmates, if they wanted to wear more feminine clothing, they'd get beat up, right? So there's some real unfortunate disadvantages to men. It's like they're expected to be more in touch with their quote female side, but the minute they do, they're going to pay the price for that from men and women, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
It's sort of a lose-lose situation. I remember when I was working with veterans who were survivors of childhood sexual trauma, right? Rape, incest, all kinds of teachers, parents, whomever it was, the coach, the priest, men, women, whomever was doing these things to them. It's like, where did they go? Where was the safety net for them? Where's the campaigns? Where's the you can come and talk to us? It's expected, or it's I don't think anybody realizes the percentage of young boys before age 18 are sexually assaulted. It's almost on par with girls. And those numbers are out there, but they don't get promoted in the same way.
No, because there's this whole patriarchal, men have privilege, women don't. Like, there's that whole narrative.
Men have been forced into
promoted.
Men have been forced into occupations that are dirty and dangerous. And if you're going to do something dirty and dangerous, then you want rewards for that, right? It makes sense in that theoretical sense. Like, it's like, if I'm going to go out there and risk my life, then I want some fruits of this. I want, I want that drink, and I want sex with you. And it's like, I think people can go too far with it, but
absolutely.
How do you manage that kind of pressure? I don't have to manage that kind of pressure. I'm so thankful.
But it's certainly educational to come have like a whole bunch of ex-lesbian, radical feminist separatist type people that were in that time frame that then transition and go, holy shit. Like, and you kind of like my natural sympathies to a degree will always lie with women, but at the same time, like, I'm, you know what I mean? Like, my sympathy lies there, but my allegiance definitely lies there now. Like, I kind of can see, like, it just on an individual, even guys that aren't being abused, aren't, like, don't have these horrific histories. Like, they have to suck it up a lot. Like, they don't, if you're having a depressive moment as a guy because you've got you know, your wife, one of your kids is struggling and your wife's off work, and you know, you have to go to work because you are the breadwinner, and you're stressed about your wife and you're stressed about your kid. And you know as well as I do that when you're experiencing emotion, with testosterone kind of being the major one, you're not always completely aware of what you're feeling until after, you know, so you can kind of have just all of these conflicting kind of things happening, and then the pressure of you must go to work. You don't get the day off. You have to go suck it up, sunshine, day after day, week after week, year after year, because you know your kid's in the hospital or whatever it is. Like there's not much sympathy for that. And you know, like even without those sorts of horror stories as well, like kind of guys that there's not a lot of social support. Like even like with male friends, like they kind of slap each other on the back and do the best that they can, but it's certainly lacking in a lot of ways. Like they really are on their own in so many ways, and that was a
I
real
found some
eye opener
exceptions
for
to
me.
that.
You know,
Thankfully,
yeah,
I found some exceptions to that, but it's by happenstance. So, for example, my father has dementia now. I'm an only child. My parents were divorced when I was 2, so my mother's been dead for 21 years. But even if she was around, like, you know, she's not married to my father. So I'm the only one around, and so I'm his caregiver.
mm,
And so I would go to these caregiver support groups. I'd be the only man there. They were all women. They were run by women. All the caregivers were women. And they would say to me, well, where's your mom? Where's your sister? And I'd be like, well, where's your aunts? And I'm like, what do you, like, I'm it. And they're like,
yeah,
oh, you're such a good son or something. Or they'd just be like, oh. And I would want to talk about, you know, some of the questions that I had and resources I was looking for. And they didn't know how to support me in the way that
mm,
they were supporting the women. And so it's this weird thing of like, I'm a caregiver, you're a caregiver. Why would you think I need any kind of different support?
yeah,
So what I did was I kept looking and looking, and I found some male caregiver groups. So for example, here in Orlando, there's an in-person group that meets once a month at our local restaurant. There's anywhere between like 15 and 30 men at every meeting. And
mm,
these are men who are supporting mostly wives, but some parents who have Alzheimer's and dementia. And these men are warm, they're kind, they're supportive. They have a lot of good advice, because you have people who their wife died, but they
mm,
still keep coming because they want to be a support to their buddies. They could just leave. So
yeah,
it's one of the most supportive environments, and that's because being a caregiver for somebody with dementia and Alzheimer's is very different than being a caregiver for somebody who has like muscular dystrophy or, you know, rheumatoid arthritis, right? And they're wheelchair bound. Like, you know, like I'm my father's son, but he has a daughter in his mind,
yeah,
right? And so, you know, we're starting to have to navigate those things now. So it's like how to navigate through things. And it's like I can talk to these caregivers. They don't know I'm trans, but I can talk to them about the struggle of being, you know, a son who's lost his dad
mm,
and lost his mother. Like my father's alive, but I'm an orphan now. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And
yeah,
what it's
yeah, I
like
do.
to be at that part of your life in that age where
Mm,
your parents are gone, either physically or mentally, they're just gone.
mm,
And I have 2 siblings that I haven't seen either one of them, one in like 30 years, another in like 20 something years. So we're completely estranged from each other. We didn't grow up in the same home together. So it's like it's just me now. It's me and my
yeah,
wife,
yeah,
right? Even though my dad's still alive. And that's a part of transition in life that I don't feel like I ever got any forewarning about. But now
yeah,
I have this group of men, and thank goodness I do, because they're strong and they're kind and
yeah,
gentlemen. So
yeah, yeah. It is good when you find that. Like I kind of hope, because I kind of fly around quite solo. I don't have many social needs. Because like, yeah, I tend to be quite self-sufficient, but so I don't socialize that much. And being a chef means I kind of would get enough socialization at work before
yeah.
COVID. Um, so I kind of see things and hope that the guys that I'm like, the interactions that I'm seeing are work based and a little bit of socially based, but you kind of, I would hope that they have some emotional support in their life, but quite often it doesn't look.
No, it's much lonelier to be a man. I explain that to people, that instant rapport that you can build with women who are strangers, where you can sort of, just talk about anything. You're waiting for the bus. Like, guys don't do that. They don't just jibber jabber along with people that are strangers to them for the most part. And so I have to work a lot harder to make connections with people. As I've gotten older, I guess I just stopped working so hard, and I'm perfectly satisfied to just have my wife as my primary resource for social activities, and now this caregiver group that I go to, but I don't see any of them outside of that. And then I have all of my friends that I've known over the years, and we write emails to each other, and we hook up on Zoom now and do things like this. Well, not recorded, of course. But it's like I don't belong to any like social group here in Orlando, so I've sort of slowed off of that. When your whole job is talking for a living, the last thing I really want to do is be on the telephone or hanging out at a bar talking. Like, I just don't want to do it. Oh, I wanted to mention really quickly, before I went to college, which I was around 30, 31 years old, I worked in 3 kitchens. I didn't go to culinary school, but I did work in 3 different kitchens as a cook. I was the only cook in the kitchen at the time, so it wasn't part of a team.
Oh, wow.
So I had a prep. I had a prep cook, but I made all the food. They prepped it and I prepared it, and plated it, and then somebody took it out. But I loved being a cook. It was a great time. It was about 10 years of my life.
It's kind of good. I always really like cooking because you have to be very, like, it's very in the moment. You have to be present. You have to be organized,
precise. Do you like that?
There's when it goes wrong, it gets really bad. But when you're on top of it and you're organized and you're getting smashed, and you know what I mean? Like, there's this rush that comes from being in control and making it all happen. That is.
Yeah. What kind of food is it? What kind of food are you making?
I'm not really cooking at the moment, but I kind of started off and did the whole fine dining, like proper fine dining kind of, celebrity chefs and fancy stuff while I was training. And then I kind of came back down over time, and now I'm kind of, because food can get really wanky. Like
kitchens can be dangerous, drug-filled spaces too.
I've had that experience as well. But so I kind of am interested in, I don't know whether I'm going to go back, but I was kind of more interested in the last few years in just doing really, like slightly above standard food really, really well. Over and over and over again, because it's kind of the repetition of cooking, like doing the same thing over and over. Like you can serve 1 or 2 or 20 meals that are all perfect, but can you serve 300 in a day? Like it's that whole, and keep the consistency, and how do you set up kitchen systems so that flows, and how do you train people? Because the last kitchen that I ran, I had, I think, 12 kitchen staff. Like, it was a big operation. So I kind of, got into that as I got older, because you just can't keep doing.
Yeah, being on your feet, I was like, I can't do this any longer. It was.
Yeah.
I was in a vegan breakfast restaurant for a couple of years, and then I moved into working at an Italian restaurant where it was fresh pasta, fresh sauce, everything we made from scratch. It was a lunch spot, and then I worked for a period of time in a steakhouse. And I was a total vegan, so it was a breakfast place. I was making steaks and eggs, and I never ate it, so I never tasted it. But I was cooking it and seasoning it, and people loved it. So
So what is your take at the moment on what's happening? Like, what are you aware of with, you know, like this whole GC thing that's happening at the moment? Like, what?
That's trans radical activists.
Trans rights activists, though they kind of
Trans
are
rights.
a bit radical. And there seems to be this generational shift that's happened. Like, when I kind of came up and when you came up, there were a lot of different identities, because I was involved in a group counseling situation, and we had what used to be called low dose guys or genderqueer guys. In the group. We had transsexuals, we had transgender kind of guys. Like, there were lots, how people framed their individual experience was very individualistic. Like, no, but there were people that were kind of vaguely the same, but not really. And we all got along and supported each other. And, you know, it was like, you know, I can say what's true for me, you can say what's true for you, and we're not going to arc off each other. And that seems to have changed a little bit over time. And you go on, I went on to Twitter and spent the first 2 weeks just being told off, basically, for, you know, by people that weren't even trans. And it's like, dude, I kind of know how this works, but, you know, like, and then I've kind of watched the GC stuff get quite, like, they didn't ever have everything quite right. And slowly over time, I've kind of been like, oh, hold on a minute, I'm not too sure about what this is about. And I kind of have reached a spot now where I'm like, you know what, like, I just have no idea what I think about this stuff. Like, it like, there's just so much happening that I'm still trying to sift through what I think is actually happening, because it's like, I just, you know.
What are you going to do? I mean, I had a Friendster account, and then I had a Facebook account, but I deactivated, obviously, Friendster a long time ago, but I deactivated my Facebook account probably around 2015. Well, no, not 2015. Gosh, I don't know. Not that, you know, it's been a number of years now that I deactivated, because I got up to like 5,000 quote friends, and I was like, ugh, you know, I didn't like being on it. That's when it started to shift to, they added that news feed element. And I had stopped reading the newspaper when I was a teenager and watching the news. I don't enjoy that. I don't want to be told news that's coming out of somebody else's, you know, viewpoints of something. So I didn't want to see the news feed, because it wasn't news that people were sharing about their own life. They were actually forwarding articles from newspapers and news shows. So I was like, oh, I'm done. So I got rid of that. And I didn't have Twitter, and I don't have Instagram. I actually just started a Twitter page. I pay a trans guy to run my Twitter page, because I don't really want anything to do with it. So quite honestly, I'm not directly exposed to the quote TRAs or the GCs. But interestingly enough, I have been attacked, you know, socially, as far as like my character, by people that would probably, I don't know if do they refer to themselves as TRAs, or is that kind of pejorative?
I'm not sure. I think they do. I think they say they're trans rights activists.
All right.
So that's probably,
because you never know, because like an MRA is a bad thing, supposedly. Yeah. But I have, you know, I've come under the fire from, it's just a couple, right? It's just a few, like half a dozen trans people who don't like me and have, you know, made their attempts to cancel me, you know, take me out, so to speak, socially, by, you know, trying to get me to lose jobs as an independent contractor, right? Trying to get people to drop me as a client, which they have not been successful at doing. But I've also diversified my client base so that I'm not dependent on just one or two. So I'm good anyway. I'm I think because I've stayed off of social media, I haven't sort of stepped into it too much, but that doesn't mean that I've been like going to trans conferences. I've been presenting at trans conferences. I've been on some trans organizations boards like Trans Mentors International and Transgender American Veterans Association and FTM International. And so I've done some of that work over the last 15 years. And so I made some friends and I made some enemies, I think, just like everybody else. And I've evolved as a person, as I've matured, and I've become more into myself as a trans man, as a human being, just like I hope everybody gives each other allowances for that. And so it's possible that I did or said things when I was younger, earlier in transition, that I can honestly tell you there are things I said that I don't even believe myself anymore.
It
So
does
that's
take
just
some.
part of it. That's just
Yeah.
part of life. But there are people who will hold on to something you said and they'll never let it go. Or they'll just make up stuff. Oh, Zander said this, and then a bunch of people will pile on. What an asshole. It's like, I never even said that thing. Like, for example, somebody spread a rumor on Facebook that I said, and they were very specific. It was an auditorium at the Gay and Lesbians Community Center in San Diego, this date, and that's when it's like, come on, who has that kind of memory? But the rumor was that I said genderqueer people don't exist. Well, that's just stupid. Of course they exist. I was a genderqueer identified person, or non-binary, whatever the word they used, right? I was genderqueer. I was an androgynous lesbian. I know lots of non-binary people. It's like, I know they exist. And I think they added that I said they do it for attention. And it's like, well, some people do things for attention. They might be binary, non-binary, cis, trans. Like, I don't know that I specifically said that. It doesn't make any sense that I would say that. So they came after me for that. More recently, I really came under attack. Again, I didn't see any of it because I'm not on Facebook or paying attention to Twitter enough to see it. But the organization Gender Dysphoria Alliance, which was founded by a trans man, a mental health nurse in Canada, started this organization. I knew very little about it. I knew Aaron. I knew about the organization. I went to the website in its current rendition. So there were probably things that had been on the website I hadn't seen. There were probably social media posts that had been made. I never saw any of them. So I guess there were people out in the trans community that developed a really deep hatred or dislike or contempt for Gender Dysphoria Alliance that I wasn't aware of. And I was asked to be an advisor to that organization. And as far as I could tell, I was just looking at the webpage, and I didn't look at every single web page on their website. But I looked at the majority of stuff and I read things, and it's probably even changed now. This was back in like September. And I was said, okay, I'll be an advisor. I gave him a picture, a little bio. It went up on the website. The next day, literally within 24 hours, a complaint was submitted to the US PATH Board of Directors. So US PATH is the United States chapter of WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They write the standards of care for your listeners who don't know about that, wpath.org. So there's a US chapter and they have their own board of directors. And so a member of the board of directors submitted a complaint about me. The board of directors took the complaint, investigated, got all kinds of evidence, and then I was the chair of the advocacy committee for US PATH. They removed me as chair. Well, they asked me to resign, and I said, why would I resign? And they said, well, you can just say that you don't have the time anymore to do it. And I said, so you're kicking me off and you want me to lie about it? So I said, I'm not going to lie. What happens if I don't resign? They said, well, then we're going to remove you. And I said, good, then you're going to have to remove me. And so I was removed. And so the US PATH Executive Committee, at the time was made up of predominantly trans women. And so, white trans women, let's just be clear about it, kicked out a Latino trans man from the chairship of a committee, a national committee, over, I don't even know what, because they won't respond to my emails asking me. I'm asking them. They won't respond to my emails asking them, what evidence did you look at? what factored into your decision to take this action? They ignored 2 emails. My third email was to the executive director of US Path. And that came back with a response saying that there will be no response. So they're completely ignoring me. So I've escalated it now to WPATH Executive Committee, and I'm asking them, on behalf of a member in good standing who serves on the Ethics Committee, was awarded the Harry Benjamin Distinguished Educator of the Year Award by WPATH last year, has been a member of the Global Education Institute faculty for like almost 3 years now for WPATH. Like, I'm a member in good standing. I'm involved. I've presented at conferences. I've been a reviewer of proposals for the symposiums and conferences, and they think they can just throw me off. Like, that's, and I don't know why exactly, but the complaint that was issued was specifically citing that I had been affiliated with Gender Dysphoria Alliance,
GDAC,
but it was misconstrued, right? It was misconstrued because I wasn't a member, I wasn't a board member, I wasn't a founder, I wasn't active.
No,
I
you
was
just got asked
listed
to
as
be
an
on the
advisor
advisory.
for 4 to 6 days, and I literally gave no advice in that period of time, and they still took this kind of action against me.
Yeah.
So I find it completely unacceptable that
It's pretty crazy.
that people like that they can do that these trans people in positions of power, trans women in positions of power, can do this to trans men. I find it really troubling. Really troubling.
Yeah, that would have been a reaction to the Wolf letter, I imagine.
Yeah, and I don't know, because their people were talking, and I had friends who were calling me saying, "Oh my God, they're talking so much smack about you on Facebook." And I said, "I don't want to know.
Yeah.
I don't want to know. I don't see it. Don't send me pictures. I don't want to know."
Yeah.
But thank you. I did ask a couple questions. Are any of them social workers? Because if they were social workers, I was going to report them to their licensing board, because you're not allowed to do that. You can't you can't defame other social workers.
Like, they could easily, like, that kind of is one of the things where it's like you could just easily like pick up the phone, go, "Hey Zander, like, what's going on? Like this and this troubles me about this situation. What do you have to say?" Oh, okay, well, let's sort this out, instead of just these walls up. Nothing. You're this, you're that. Like, it just is a bit crazy.
To add to that, the person who lodged the complaint, or sent in the complaint, was actually the board liaison to my committee. So we had already communicated. We had already talked. Yeah. She, a trans woman, she didn't call me. She didn't email me. She just sent a complaint. Right? So she's the liaison to my committee, but didn't have the decency
to liaise
with me.
Yeah.
She'd rather play that game than be ethical. This is a college professor, by the way. It's really disappointing all the way around that an adult in leadership power would behave this way. It's completely unethical. It's unethical. And the fact is that people are electing people like this to the board. And I think something needs to be done about it, but I don't know what to do. I'm kind of at a loss for what to do there. So far, they're just getting away with being bullies. And that's how I see them. These are bullies. And I think anybody who is doxing, is name calling, is going after people on social media, those are just bullies. Trans people can be bullies too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm starting to wonder, because I kind of came in and looked at that and was put off and got pulled in another direction, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll see what's going on over here. And over time, I agree with some of it, but that's problematic, as like that's going in an area that is getting more and more toxic by the day. So I kind of started to double back around, and I'm chatting to a few people privately. I'm starting to kind of think, maybe they're just reacting out of, like, they're doing this sort of stuff just out of fear that things are going to revert back to what they used to be like, which is understandable. But I don't know, like, I don't think, has there ever been a case where human rights have been, like, people have been given like a subcommittee, like community has been given the rights that we've been given and then just had them revoked for no particular, you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't.
I mean, I would imagine in some countries, more totalitarian or communistic countries where, you
But
know,
not in a
all kinds of
democracy.
people,
Yeah.
but not that I know of. And so it's like, let me be clear. I'm not comparing humans to animals, but
No.
I think you'll understand my point when, you know, there are members of our community, the trans community, that have suffered more than others.
Yeah.
Right? They had, their families were not accepting, so they were rejected. Maybe they're estranged from their family. Maybe they had really severe consequences socially, physically, right? Getting bullied, getting beat up, right? Maybe sexually assaulted, all kinds of things. As corrective measures by crazy people, right? And terrible families.
Yeah.
And so they have a trauma background, right? As a social worker, I understand trauma backgrounds and how trauma can impact our ability to experience joy and love and contentment, if we let it rule our lives, right?
Yeah.
If we allow all of these cognitive distortions, right? These negative thoughts in our brain, right? It's like I went through some troubling and terrible and challenging parts of my childhood too, and I had to overcome a lot of the limitations that were placed on me, and then I took on myself, because it's a coping mechanism. You know, you have to figure out, how am I going to survive this? And then you get out on your own. You're an adult, and you're trying to figure out, like, what can I let go of? What can I keep? What can I add on so that you can become a full-fledged, integrated human being? It's not an easy task. And so I think what we're dealing with people who have trauma backgrounds, who are not integrated, who are completely dysregulated in how to handle the emotional distress in their life. And so they are attacking, just like an abused dog at the shelter is going to cower in the corner or bite your hand. And so some member of our community cower in the corner, and some bite the hand, and some of us get brought into a loving home, and we re-socialize, and we go on living productive, happy lives.
Yeah.
And so some of us have been fortunate, and some of us have been very unfortunate. And so I feel for people who have really struggled and continue to struggle, and that's no reason to bite our hands. There's no excuse for that.
And then you often see those sorts of people you can see that they haven't processed their trauma, and they get put in leadership positions because they're popular, or they have a certain skill base, and it just is.
Well, there's no reason, Kevin. There's no incentive.
Disaster,
right? There's no incentive to process your trauma and come out on the other end, because there are rewards. If all you do is spend your whole career telling all your trauma stories and you get paid for that, if you get attention, if you can become an influencer because you've traumatized and you get to tell your story over and over and over again, and people feel sympathy for you, like, there's no incentive. There's no incentive to come out of that if you get all these rewards, all of this acceptance.
If your income depends on you not processing it, then that's another thing.
My income doesn't depend on me being trans and telling my story. That's not what I do. That's not where my money comes from. That's not my bread and butter. And so, but as a psychotherapist, as a social worker, clearly I was a gender therapist for a number of years. I've worked with trans people with deep wounds. And I know that there are treatments for that. I know there are ways to intervene in how destructive that can become, but people have to be willing. And now, especially with this total rejection of therapy and mental health assessments in order to access hormones and surgeries, people are going to be slipping through the cracks who are very, very emotionally unstable, addicted to drugs, and abusive and bullies. And they're entering our community, and they're even more destabilized once they start transition, because it's a destabilizing experience.
Yeah, because it's a lot to,
It is a lot, socially, legally, medically. It really is a lot. And I think people are foolish to think that you can just take hormones and just be okay. It's like, no, for the most part, if you don't have a stable structure, emotional support, it's going to be a challenge.
I remember calling
people around you.
The first call, because I kind of saw Body Alchemy, and kind of had like that reality slapped me in the face, like, this kid, this is it, hello, here I am. And it had kind of transition had been kind of, and testosterone had kind of been popping up for like years and years and years, and I had kind of just been ignoring it. And then I saw body alchemy, and it was no longer deniable. And I a couple of weeks later, I built up the courage and called the local gender center, and there was a trans guy working there at the time, and I was like, oh, I don't really remember what I said. It was like the conversation lasted like a minute. He was not having a great day, and I was like, I was just wanting to talk to someone about maybe taking testosterone, or I think I'm trans, or whatever I said. And he was like, well, it's like this. If you're an asshole before, you'll be an asshole after. Like, it just makes you more of an asshole. And hung up the phone, and it was like, oh shit, okay.
Oh my gosh.
And then I went to the first counseling session, and the counselor was like, oh, so you want to go bald and have back hair, do you? And ear hair, and like massive eyebrow hair. And I was like, shit, maybe I need to think about this some more. Wow. But yeah, like, it was kind of like, wow. I kind of got slapped with reality, for the first few times that I would go to the center. They'd be like, yeah, you can totally do this, but bang, like, do you really want to, kind of stuff that was was
sort
really
of like confronting to Judaism.
Yeah, it was
they say no like 3 times or something.
Yeah, it was confronting
it's
at the time, but it was it meant that I had my head screwed on as well. And then
I don't think it needs to be as brutal as that, but there's something about like having to scale the wall and just being able to just fling the doors wide open, like something in between that,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was, I kind of even at the time thought it was, when he was like, well, it just makes you more of an asshole, and hung up the phone. And he was like, if you're an asshole before, you'll be an asshole after. If you're not an asshole before, you won't be an asshole after. And kind of, you're right with that? Okay, cool. No worries. And then went back to what he was doing. Right. I kind of, like, that was amusing even at the time, but I was like, oh shit. Okay. Well, but you kind of,
not everybody who's trans and does a transition needs to be in psychotherapy. No. I think as a social worker, I really strongly believe in the full biopsychosocial assessment. It's a comprehensive assessment of your current situation. Do you have a job? If not, what's your source of income? Do you have housing? If not, let's get you into it. If you do, is it stable? Is it safe? Can you pay the bills? Do you have transportation? If not, let's work on getting you a bus pass. Like, how are you going to get to your appointments? Who's your support network? Where do you go? What do you do for fun? What are your sleeping habits? What is your diet habits? What's your exercise habits? Like, these are all things that you find out. Psychotherapy is something different from that. Yeah. But I think that group therapy or peer discussion groups should definitely be encouraged, because I think we do need the social support around. And even like you said, when there's all those different kinds of guys in a room, you get to sit back and think, oh, well, that's a decent guy. Well, that guy's kind of an asshole. I'm not going to be like that guy. Yeah. You kind of get, and then you can look at the men in your workplace, the men in your family, because, basically we get a do-over. Yeah. We can be any kind of man we want. We're not preconditioned through our adolescence, with people who know us in a certain way. We have more flexibility. And so I think it helps to be, I remember I was at a FTM support group, and one guy asked a question, which was something like, well, now that I'm a man, how should I act when I'm on the bus? Like, should I let all the women on first? Should I give up my seat? Like, how should I stand? And somebody was like, man, just get on the bus. There's no difference between men and women. Like, if you want to be a gentleman, sure, you can let them all on first, and sure, you can give up your seat, but there's no obligation to do that unless it's like an older lady or a pregnant woman. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm a feminist. Fully able-bodied young women can stand on a bus just like me. Yeah. And they could carry their groceries just like me. Why? Because women are awesome, and they're strong, and they're powerful. And I believe that. And so I don't think they need my seat. I think that's very patronizing.
Yeah.
But you know, for young kids or for elderly women, pregnant women. So I like that correction, which was, dude, just get on the bus.
Yeah.
You're just, there's no difference,
Yeah.
you know,
You're
and that
overthinking a
started
little
me
here.
thinking, it's like, oh, yeah, you know, I don't have to pay attention to, am I walking like a man? Am I talking like a man? Just like be yourself. That's the message I got over and over and over again. And it's what stuck with me the most. It's probably what gets me the most in trouble. But I don't know any other way to be.
Because the testosterone really works, and after, you know, like
It does.
you know, somewhere between the first and second decade, you kind of, you know, like you kind of have to stop well, you don't have to, but you like, it just gets exhausting to keep passing, well, I'm not this, I'm this, or I'm this and not that, and blah 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 blah. And it's like, you know, like I just am what I am, and people see me as a guy, and you know, on some level, on my day-to-day when I'm out and about, that's just the reality of this situation. Like, and I can do somersaults in my head all I like about, you know, and tie myself up in knots, but that guy that's walking towards me just sees me as a guy, like, and that's all he needs to know. Like, that's, you know, and you just
that could
kind
be a
of
matter
let
of
stuff
safety.
go. Yeah, you know,
Privacy, safety, you know.
But you just kind of, you know, like as time goes on, it just really becomes less, you know, important and less of a thing. And, you know, you kind of just, I just let a lot of stuff go over time, really. And just, you know, like I just am what I am, and I'm living my life, and, you know.
Yep.
Pretty
I
much.
hear you. I'm just living my life too. I'm living my good life because I'm living in Orlando, Florida with my wife of almost 20 years. And, you know, I'm doing what I love to do, and I'm meeting, you know, it's like you and I would have never met. I don't have any plans to go to Australia. It's too expensive. It's too far away. I don't want to be on a plane for that long. But here we are, right? It's COVID days where everybody's Zooming. So, you know, we got to meet through Max Valerio. Thank God, Max.
Yeah.
I met Max when I first started my transition when I was living in San Francisco, and he would come every once in a while to our little FDM discussion group. And it was always like, oh, Max Valerio.
Yeah,
you know?
because he was
And we
like,
stayed
you know,
in
one of the
contact
first
the whole time.
transitioners. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jameson Green is my mentor. So he and I have been in contact for 16 years. And so we text each other, we email, we present together on panels, we've published together. So we've done a lot of things over the last 16 years. So I'm really I'm grateful for the work of the gentlemen that I stand on the shoulders of.
Yeah.
And I don't ever want to forget that they sacrifice so much more than I ever have or will.
Yeah, there is that
are.
as well. Like, it's so much easier now than it, you know.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Lou's story is, you know, his persistence is quite something. But anyway, I think we both need to go.
I do need to go.
Yeah, I'm going to be late for work as well. So thanks for chatting.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I hope we can do it again, and I hope we can stay in touch even beyond the videos.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.